There is a certain kind of person who experiences life differently from most. Their inner world is highly sensitive, not fragile, but finely tuned. They notice shifts in mood, subtle changes in tone, unspoken tension in a room. They feel what others feel, often before a single word is spoken. They move through life absorbing emotional atmospheres the way skin absorbs heat. Stress, resentment, sadness, longing, none of it passes unnoticed. These people are often called empaths. But what most people don't understand is this. Being an empath is not simply a gift. For many, it is something that was learned, early, unconsciously, and for survival. Carl Jung observed a striking pattern among deeply sensitive individuals. Again and again, he noticed that many of them developed a life organized around other people's emotional needs. On the surface, this looks noble. They are caring, supportive, always available. They listen, they soothe, they understand. But Jung saw something far more unsettling beneath this pattern. Much of this endless giving was not rooted in free, conscious compassion. It was rooted in adaptation. In childhood, these individuals learned that safety came from attunement. They learned to read the emotional environment to stay out of danger. They became skilled at anticipating moods, preventing conflict, calming tension. They learned to be useful. They learned to be agreeable. They learned to shrink their own needs so others would not explode, withdraw, or collapse. What later looks like empathy often began as vigilance. The empath's sensitivity is frequently a wound that learned how to survive. Jung would describe this as a life dominated by the persona, the social self built to meet expectations and maintain acceptance. For empaths, the persona is especially polished. It is the one who is always kind, always patient, always understanding, never angry, never demanding, never too much. They smile through exhaustion. They say, "It's okay," when it isn't. They say yes while their body tightens in protest. And slowly, without realizing it, they disappear into the emotional lives of others. For a long time, this works. They are needed. They are appreciated, at least for what they provide. They attract people who lean heavily on them, partners, friends, family members who offload emotions without ever carrying their share. Relationships form around imbalance. And somewhere along the way, the empath loses something essential. They no longer know who they are when they are not needed. This is where Jung's understanding becomes revolutionary. He believed the psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness, toward consciousness, toward integration. And whatever is denied will eventually demand recognition. For empaths, awakening rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives quietly, through exhaustion. You're sitting alone after another day of managing everyone else's emotions. You said yes again when you meant no. You absorbed tension that wasn't yours. Your body feels tight, your mind overstimulated, your nervous system humming with fatigue. And then a thought arises, not loud, not angry, just honest. What if I stopped? What if I stopped fixing? What if I stopped absorbing? What if I stopped being responsible for everyone else's emotional state? This question is small, but it carries the force of psychological revolution. Because once you truly ask it, something shifts. You begin to see. Because once you truly ask it, something shifts. Jung wrote that consciousness is irreversible. Once something becomes visible, it cannot be unseen. Once you realize you are not actually responsible for other people's feelings, there is no going back to innocence. And this realization is terrifying, because it reveals a painful truth. Much of your identity was built around a lie. The lie that your worth comes from being useful. The lie that love must be earned through sacrifice. The lie that saying no makes you dangerous or selfish. This realization feels like a kind of death, and in Jungian terms, it is. Because beneath the empath's persona lies something long suppressed, the shadow. For most people, the shadow holds socially unacceptable impulses, but for empaths, the shadow contains something very specific: rage. Not explosive, chaotic rage, but deep, accumulated fury. The anger of someone who gave endlessly and was taken for granted. The anger of someone who carried others while being carried by no one. The anger of someone who mistook endurance for love. This rage is not a moral failure. It is not a sign that the empath is becoming cruel. It is the shadow asserting self-worth. It is the psyche finally saying, I matter. My needs matter. My time matters. Jung warned that enlightenment does not come from imagining purity while denying darkness. Transformation happens only when the shadow is made conscious. The empath must descend into denied anger, unmet needs, silenced boundaries. And in that descent, something breaks open. The false self cracks, and the real self begins to emerge. This emergence surprises people. The empath does not become heartless. They do not lose compassion. Instead, they develop discernment. They begin to notice patterns they once ignored. Some respond with confusion. Others with guilt-inducing comments. Some with anger. They say, "You've changed," and they mean it as an accusation. What they are really experiencing is loss. The loss of access to someone who once abandoned themselves for their comfort. Jung called this the death of the persona. The mask becomes too heavy to wear. Constant niceness becomes exhausting. The empath starts telling the truth, not aggressively, but plainly. They express preferences. They admit fatigue. They stop pretending. For people who only knew the performing version, this is destabilizing. But Jung understood something crucial. Self-acceptance eventually becomes more valuable than social approval. The empath learns they can disappoint people and survive. They can disagree and remain whole. They can be authentic, and the world does not end. Another shift occurs. Projection collapses. Empaths often project their own depth onto others, assuming others are as reflective, caring, and capable of growth as they are. During awakening, that projection returns, and it is disillusioning. You realize some people were never capable of meeting you where you were. Not unwilling, incapable. This hurts. But it also frees you. You stop investing where reciprocity is impossible. Boundaries, once felt as betrayal, become sacred. You say no without over-explaining. The guilt arises, but beneath it is something new: integrity. Each boundary strengthens the inner center. Jung called this individual integrity, a self that does not collapse when others disapprove. The empath discovers something radical: healthy selfishness. Not narcissism, not indifference, but the understanding that self-care is not optional. It is the foundation of authentic connection. As guilt dissolves, authority shifts inward. You no longer ask, "Are they upset?" You ask, "Am I aligned?" This is the movement from external authority to inner authority, a central milestone in individuation. The empath stops performing emotions, stops shrinking, stops apologizing for existing. Some people are drawn to this authenticity, others are repelled. Relationships reorganize, some end, others deepen. What remains are connections between whole people, not unconscious contracts of self-sacrifice. Jung never romanticized this process. He called it the night-sea journey, a descent before rebirth. Loneliness appears, grief appears, but so does truth. Even the body responds. As boundaries form, the nervous system relaxes. Fatigue eases, sleep improves. Jung understood what modern psychology now confirms. The body cannot carry everyone else's emotional weight without breaking. When the empath stops being the world's emotional landfill, healing begins. Individuation is not a destination, it is a spiral, revisiting themes at deeper levels of awareness. Each choice toward authenticity strengthens the foundation. Eventually, the empath becomes something else entirely, not depleted, not self-sacrificing, but conscious. They still care, but from choice, not compulsion. They help, but without losing themselves. This is what Jung meant by wholeness. Sensitivity was never the weakness. Unconscious self-abandonment was. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect. You were not born to disappear into others. You were born to become yourself, fully, honestly, and without apology. And when one empath awakens, it gives others permission to do the same. That is the quiet revolution Jung spent his life mapping. And if this resonates, understand this: you are not becoming selfish. You are becoming whole. And the world needs conscious empaths far more than exhausted ones. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.